Hello watch enthusiasts and welcome to Watch Chronicler. As watch lovers, we all enjoy history and heritage. It's the bedrock of much of today's appreciation for timepieces, along with the roles which these watches played in their respective fields. Watches have featured at the heart of all of the 20th century's conflicts, pursuits, and world-changing achievements, whether at the top of a mountain or the bottom of the sea. In truth, they form the ultimate technical companion to the ends of the earth. As a consequence of their tough construction, inherent practicality and obvious functionality, dive watches have found themselves at the heart of many of the most fascinating adventures, leaving their manufacturers with a great story to tell. These stories range from being on the wrists of the most intrepid experimental divers, stretching human abilities, to those of soldiers fighting for their lives. In today's video, let's take a look at a few watches under £1,000 released or updated this year, with serious heritage behind them. Our story begins with a watch you can buy in modern form, of course, today, and which kick-started the story of the dive watch, the Zodiac Super Seawolf. In 1953, dive watches were no standard production item, and as far as we know, only 3 offerings existed. The Blancpain 50 Fathoms, which was launched that year with France's covert diving team, the prototype Rolex Submariner, as found for a time on the wrist of Jacques Cousteau, and Zodiac's Seawolf. If the Blancpain was a military tool, the Seawolf was a civilian toy to be enjoyed and used for the new occupation of scuba diving, a technology only celebrating its 10th anniversary that year. In fact, there is some evidence to suggest that the Zodiac was the first dive watch of them all. Inside this watch was an Adolphe Schild automatic movement in various iterations which, like in the 50 Fathoms or Submariner, was protected from the elements to a depth of 100 metres. However, the design of this delightful recreational diver was unique, and whether you're looking at the early versions with numerals, the later models with triangles, or the blocky marketed versions of the 60s, it was a very different proposition to its competitors and certainly looked unique. The modern Super Seawolf is a curious thing and starts this video off at the top of the price range with the most classical variant they offer. This features a black or cream dial, triangular markers, and a quietly legible design. In contemporary form, Zodiac have incrementally improved the model, and with a brushed steel bezel, newly simplified caseback, and a strengthened clasp, this might be the best overall version they've made. Of course, technically it's very much business as usual, with a unidirectional bezel and a screwed crown, but recently it seems that the Super Seawolf has shown that you can get a more detailed, historically important, and well-constructed watch than the Oris Diver 65. Inside, this watch uses the STP-3-13 movement, a Swiss ETA 2824 clone made by Zodiac's own manufacturer. This is fully decorated and given a swan neck regulator, as well as blued screws to enhance the value offered, even though you can't actually see it through a closed caseback. As a watch with history, quality and engineering, look no further. The 1960s were a very different time to the 1950s for dive watches. Most notable was the growth of a market for tools to accompany enthusiasts to greater depth, and with a more developed design. This was an audience captured by Swiss brand Mido with their 1959 Ocean Star collection. Even so, it was the 1961 release of the Powerwind 1000 which put their divers on the map, but which, produced in small numbers until 1965, remains elusive. Here the format for a dive watch remained conservative, with a rotating bezel, luminous hands, and a 300 metre water resistance. However, this wasn't all, as these watches displayed something rarely seen, a decompression dial. This dial, known for giving the watch the nickname Rainbow, provided the valuable measurement of decompression times at different depths, whilst the 12, 3, 6 and 9 numerals were shrunk to the centre of the dial. The aesthetics and the function was individual and typical of this time of innovation. To celebrate this watch, Mido have relaunched it in a modern form with a 40.5mm case in stainless steel at a price slightly below that of the Zodiac. The overall design is very different, but retains the key aspect of the original, the dial. This appears in vivid Technicolor, whilst the black bezel and tall crown guards offer a sense of toughness, even with beautifully applied Arabic numerals. Whilst initially complex looking, the dial can be read rather easily in either meters or feet, and gives a practical, if rudimentary, additional complication for anyone who wishes to take this watch diving. Inside is a rather modern movement from ETA, which is based on the venerable ETA 2824. This movement gives an 80-hour power reserve, even if this is at the cost of a lower beat rate, and uses a silicon balance spring to give an enhanced resistance to magnetism. The result is a classic watch with considerable heritage, but also which gives technology at a price one just can't refuse. If you're enjoying this video, why not like, subscribe and hit the bell icon to catch more in future? You can also read more on watchchronicler.com, where you'll find historical features, detailed reviews, and the watches which you deserve to know about. Follow us on Instagram to catch all the latest about these watches and see some fantastic watch-related photography. The next watch to discuss also found its roots in 1959, when Certina launched the DS, standing for Double Security. This title incorporated Certina's choice to space the movement away from the dial and case in order to allow for motion under shock, as well as using a screwed crystal for water resistance. Inevitably, with all of these features, it was always going to end up becoming a dive watch. These watches went on to considerable success when used by the US Navy during the SEALAB and SEALAB 2 underwater experiments in 1964 and 1965. In fact, the screwed crystals even seemed to be able to resist helium ingress, a serious problem for other watches used, such as pieces from Rolex. To revive the watches which survived so much, Certina launched the DS PH200M in 2018, which recreated a version from 1967. Unlike most revival divers, this watch even used the same acrylic crystal design as the original, albeit with a scratch-resistant coating over its surface. Inside, this 42.8mm stainless steel dive watch was fitted with the ETA 80.611, another ETA 2824 variant with the same 80-hour power reserve, and retained the original 200-meter water resistance. Now, in 2020, you can get this watch in upgraded form, with a stunning blue convex ceramic bezel, revised colour scheme, and an exhibition caseback. The result is not only stunning, but also a serious value offering. A particular highlight which remains is the handset. These are broad, legible, and also extremely appealing hands, especially when added to the crosshair dial. If you want an affordable but great-looking diver with period-correct technology, this is the one for you. The story of the Certina DS, though, did not end in 1967 and continued to innovate well into the 70s. A notable stop along the way was for Tektite 1 and Tektite 2, during which divers experimented with extended life in a subaquatic environment. During Tektite 1, for example, divers spent 60 days beneath the surface. On their wrists around the US Virgin Islands were Certina's DS2 dive watches, boasting a 500-meter water resistance. Recreating these watches, Certina has launched the DS Super PH500M, the logical successor to the dive watches of the 1960s, and a recreation of those original DS2s from 1969 and some also being used in 1970. This ISO 6425 compliant watch revives many of the design cues seen on earlier Certinas, but now with a much tougher case and an orange dial. This watch replaces acrylic crystal with anti-reflective sapphire and grows to 43mm. Despite sharing movements, the emphasis here moves away from the charm of the 67 models to the technical experimentation of the 70s. The result may be somewhat less popular than the warmth of the 200-meter equivalents, but successfully captures the tool watch which the original was. If we're discussing affordable dive watches of 2020 with history, we have to finish with undeniably the most iconic watch in the video, and one of the most iconic watches of the 20th century. This is the Seiko 6105.8110, as has been recreated in the new SPB 151 and 153 models in 2020. Produced from 1970 to 1977, the 6105.8110 marked the success of Seiko's somewhat less professional dive watch beside the high-beat 6159 or saturation divers of the 70s. Instead, this watch was a watch designed for a casual diver or simply for someone in need of a reliable, well-made and extremely tough watch for all purposes. Inevitably, the Vietnam War proved a perfect proving ground for this watch and its 150-meter water resistance. Today, this watch is an icon. Seiko had already produced a handful of very admirable dive watches by this stage, including the monoblock 6159, their very first dive watch, the 62 MAS, and the slender 6105-8000, yet it was what we refer today as the Captain Willard after its use in Apocalypse Now, which stuck. There was also another story which demonstrated the sheer toughness of the original 6105, Naomi Oomura's solo journey to the North Pole. This was a world first, and marked a new era of expedition. On his wrist, of course, was this Seiko dive watch. Whilst previously reissued by Seiko in an ultra-limited and ultra-expensive form, the new SPB divers represent an affordable but clearly premium option. In this regard, they're somewhat less adventurous in concept than the originals, but remain standard production and, with a higher price, will offer higher quality. What they do retain is the original form, in 42.7mm size, and give a water resistance of 200 meters in addition to the lovely handset of that original watch. The movement used is the top of Seiko's standard production before you get into former Grand Seiko territory, and is the 6R35 with a 70-hour power reserve. Seiko has also introduced a green dial and bezel as an alternative to the black, which captures something of the above-water history of the original. It's altogether a striking watch, and as with all the watches in this video, very different. What it certainly doesn't lack is a story behind it. So, which of these watches was your favourite, and which has the best story for you? All cut their teeth on the adventures of man, and are ready to be taken on plenty more adventures in future. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to catch more in future. Thank you very much for watching. This is Armon from WatchChronicler.com, out.